Hello, Packers fans. Welcome into the Green 19 podcast from JS Online and PackersNews.com. I'm Kassidy Hill, joined as always by Tom Silverstein and Ryan Wood. We are sort of scattered all over the country right now, but at least one of us made it to Miami. Ryan, I know you had almost like, do you remember that old Jonathan Taylor Thomas movie, I'll Be Home for Christmas?
Yeah.
That's what it felt like your trip was like last night as we were getting updates. But I know you made it to Miami and experienced a very jubilant Packers locker room today after the Packers defeated the Miami Dolphins 26-20. I'll kind of let you start since you were there, boots on the ground. Spoon, I know weather kind of kept you from being able to get out as this blizzard just hammered the Midwest. But Ryan, what did you kind of take from that Packers locker room as you were walking through and talking to some of those guys today?
A lot of Christmas cheer. Very jubilant place.
Well, they got a lot of gifts.
Tua was in a giving Santa Claus mood today. You could hear them clapping from the outside the hallway, which is the first time I've heard a celebratory reaction this season outside the locker room. When Rasul Douglas was doing his podium time, it sounded like South Beach inside their locker room. They were cranking music. I mean, just over the moon with this win, and why wouldn't they be? This, to me, is the moment when, we talked about it the last few weeks. Like, holy smokes, the NFC is so terrible. They got a chance that they don't really deserve. Like they have no right to have this chance, but they have a chance. Doesn't mean that they're going to capitalize on it. This is the moment that legitimizes the fact that they've got a chance. I mean, they need one thing to happen at this point other than winning their last two games, and that's Washington to lose again. I don't know if it'll happen. They've got the Browns. They got the Cowboys. I don't know if the Cowboys are going to be playing for anything. But they've got a chance, and it's stunning when they lose 5 straight games at one point this season, 7 of 8. It's stunning that they're at this point right now.
Spoon, I'm trying to remember. I don't think any of us picked the Packers to win this game.
No.
I picked the Dolphins. Y'all too. Pete picked the Dolphins. And we kind of felt like this was going to be a game after the Dolphins had lost 3 and the Packers had won the last 2. This was going to be the game where each team's true colors were once again shown. But instead, it felt like things sort of continued to fall the Packers' way, but not necessarily. They did not play lights out. This was still a tough game that they very easily could have lost. So are you any more confident about this Packers team as they kind of make this final push today, or are you still say, here's the flaws and they're going to crop up and bite them at some point?
Well, I think they played a much better game defensively than I expected. I thought their pass rush was really good. Probably the best I've seen it since Rashawn Gary has been out. They had their usual breakdowns in coverage, but to hold Miami scoreless in the second half was pretty remarkable. I know I saw this a lot on Twitter and everywhere else where, people are talking about, all they need is Washington to lose a game, but they're staring the Vikings and Lions in the face. And the Vikings still have something to play for next week. They're still playing for the number 1 seed. So is this like a 1-game aberration? Then they're going to go back and Justin Jefferson's going to, get 400 yards on him next week? I don't know. I think for once they played their rules in the secondary pretty well, and they got a combination of pass rush and decent linebacker play. Mm-hmm. So that was promising. I think offensively they're still kind of a muddy mess. I don't know. They just don't seem to have anything consistent offensively going.
Let's start with the defense as we really kind of like hammer in on some of these things. Spoon, you mentioned that they played much better than you thought they would. Of course, still gave up some big completions. Some of that do you kind of just live with when you're against this offense that has its speed? I mean, that Waddle touchdown was an 84-yard touchdown, and I think 74 yards of it was after the catch. It was a 10-yard catch and go, and he just cut through everyone. This was the defense. Of course, Joe Barry probably always wants to run, and you can kind of live and die by it. where you might give up those plays, or you give up what was the one play? I think it was to Hill where Rasul passed him off. I think it was Rasul, and then Amos didn't pick him up in time. And Amos and Rudy Ford both had to pull him down, and it was a 52-yard catch. But then you continue to play that zone, and if you stick with it, you come away with 3 interceptions on consecutive drives in the second half. So, Ryan, I'm going to start with you because I know this was your focus for your post-game story. Was this more about the Packers defense finally playing up to the standard they were supposed to play to? Was it Tua giving them some stuff, or was it a little bit of both?
Oh, it's definitely a little bit of both. The first half boiled down to 2 huge plays. Jalen Waddle made the second drive for the Dolphins a 1-play touchdown drive because of the 84-yard catch. And it's easy to look at that play and say, that's Jalen Waddle's speed. But Adrian Amos was very open about what the Packers did wrong on that play. The play came off of an action pass fake, and it sucked up. Adrian Amos said the linebacker, which was Devondre Campbell. But I don't know if it was just him or Rudy Ford was in the vicinity too, and he bit on it as well. But it sucked up. It pulled the second level closer to the line of scrimmage and let Jalen Waddle run into this open space behind him. Can't happen. Rudy Ford bit on an underneath route on the 52-yard bomb to Tyreek Hill, which let Tyreek Hill just run a deep over to open space. Can't happen. You can't give those guys open field to use their speed. And that was the entire game plan that the Packers came into. When Joe Barry said this week, we got to keep everything in front of us in the middle, it meant you can't give outside open field to these guys with this kind of speed. Jerry Gray ripped into this secondary in the second half at halftime in a way that he hasn't really at any point all season. He's not a guy who's known to light a fire, but he absolutely, Rasul Douglas said he cursed us out bad. And for Jerry Gray, what was so unsettling, so hard for him to stomach, impossible for him to stomach, was how utterly avoidable those 2 plays were. It was a byproduct of the defense not being in the assignment space that it was supposed to be in, which is the one thing they knew coming into this game. Can't give those 2 open field for their speed. Adrian Amos said that by the end of the game, when they went out for that last series, up 26-20, not needing to keep the Dolphins out of the end zone, he knew they were going to win because they finally figured out how to keep the top on the defense. They did that the entire second half. And if you do that against this defense, you don't give them those open spots and open zones to run free in. It's a lot easier against this Dolphins offense. So it was about, look, the Tua Tagovailoa interception to Jair Alexander. He had Tyreek Hill open for 10 yards on a stop route, found a soft space, sailed it over his head. About the easiest interception Jair Alexander's ever going to have in his career. So there were some gifts today, but the Packers secondary in that second half was also, it was the benefactor. It created the gifts that they got because they finally kept the lid on the defense.
We saw more Darnell Savage and Ennis Gaines in the second half. Did you find out a reasoning behind that?
Well, those 2 plays I just mentioned might have had something to do with it, especially the Tyreek Hill late in the second quarter, that deep over where Rudy Ford's supposed to be there and he was underneath the play against the guy that you can't let get behind you. Other than that, I'm just spitballing here. No, I don't know the reason for that, but it doesn't take much to connect those 2 plays.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
It looked to me like they benched Rudy Ford. I mean, he just can't stop himself from biting on these sucker routes, and teams just keep running it at him. He's a good, solid player, but that's his weakness, and they could not allow that to happen anymore. And then I'm assuming Ennis Gaines came in for Keyshawn Nixon after he got hurt. And yes. Gaines, well, he's a safety. He played slot in college. That's what he was a slot guy. And he's a big physical guy around the line of scrimmage. I don't know how well he knows the defense, but he's another physical guy like Douglas on the field. And that doesn't hurt, especially in the run game.
we've talked so much about this defense needing turnovers and how they can be contagious. And it feels like the past 3 weeks everybody's catching one. I mean, as you said, Jair Alexander with the easiest interception of his career. He said afterwards to Pam Oliver in his post game interview, and Ryan, I think he said it to y'all in the locker room as well, that he was just shocked that Tua was throwing it. He like couldn't believe. He was like, "Is he really overthrowing this ball right now? Am I really about to catch this?" And then Devondre Campbell, Rasul Douglas with the interception to end it as well. Um, I may be overstepping or overthinking, but Kirk Cousins feels like one of those quarterbacks too, where he can shred you for 400 yards, but he's going to throw some of those prayers up as well. So if they keep racking these up, they could continue to do that next week versus the Vikings as well. Let's look at the front seven real quick though. Spoon, you made the comment that this is probably one of the best pass rush performances that they've had since losing Rashawn Gary. Devontae Wyatt went in, presumably because of Dean Lowry's injury, but we just continue to see flashes from him. Even if Dean Lowry is able to get back on the field health-wise next week, do you want to see more Devontae Wyatt?
Well, on passing downs, he should be on the field. He should be in their nickel, probably with Kenny Clark. Now, Jerron Reed played a really good game, too. Jerron Reed was all over the place. They took advantage of some weaknesses on Miami's offensive line. And I thought the outside linebackers came right at Tua, and that's what you have to do. You have to get really aggressive and get up on him and make him make a decision. And I thought both Hollins and Enagbare were very aggressive. But yeah, Devontae Wyatt needs to be on the field. And I think we'll continue to see him on the field. He had I think LaFleur mentioned him in his post-game press conference. That's exactly the time you want your first round pick to sort of hit his stride. And I think that's what's happening for him.
And yeah, you mentioned another name I wanted to just touch on for a second. It feels like Justin Hollins has changed the way this defense sets the edge. Is that overstating?
A little bit. I mean, I don't think he's
not changed the way they do it. He's helped them do it. That's the better way to say.
I think he's stepped in and given them a third guy. They don't have a third guy. When Gary went down, they were really hurting, and now they've got Preston Smith, and Enagbare, I think is a good starter. I mean, he's coming on. And then he gives them another guy that they can put outside. And he's a veteran. He knows what he's doing. And I think they even played Quay Walker out there a little bit. They sort of used a 3 inside linebacker set. And I'm not sure if they took an outside linebacker out or if they just put Walker on the line of scrimmage or what. But Walker got some pass rush on the outside as well.
Enagbare, to me, he's still the third guy because Rashawn Gary's their top guy, and they just don't have him. He's out. So I think of Enagbare as a third guy. To me, he's given them more on the edge than they ever got from their third guy last year. I mean, he has really flashed. And with Devontae Wyatt, this is what happened with Kenny Clark in 2016 in his rookie year. He was very, very quiet until December. Did next to nothing. He might have played a little bit more, but they weren't meaningful, impactful snaps. And in December of his rookie year, you saw him start to actually make some impact. And he came on late in the year. Then he turned into Kenny Clark. I'm not saying that's going to happen with Devontae Wyatt. We have no idea. I'm not saying Devontae Wyatt is Kenny Clark. I'm saying that this is the trajectory we saw from Kenny Clark. And it's why I never once freaked out and sounded the alarms when we didn't see Devontae Wyatt through the first 2-3 months of the season, because rookie defensive linemen, especially on the interior, take time to marinate at this level. It does not happen at that position overnight when you come from college, even if you are a really talented, athletic first-round pick like Devontae Wyatt. It takes time to learn how to play in the trenches at this level. It took time for Kenny Clark. We'll see where Devontae Wyatt goes from here, but this was as to be expected, and it's promising that you're seeing these flashes now in December of his rookie year.
Guys, let's flip to the offensive side of the ball. while we're talking about defensive linemen, let's flip to the offensive side of the ball. It felt like Christian Wilkins was all over the field today. Let's just start there before we get into some of the good parts. I felt like Christian Wilkins was all over the field for the Dolphins. He was doing everything. He was rushing Rodgers. He was putting pressure on him. He was chasing down Romeo Doubs to pull him down from behind for a tackle. He was knocking passes down. He was doing a little bit of everything. I know that he's an incredible talent, but this was one of those weeks that they had not had in a while where they're down Bakhtiari, they're down Jenkins, they're putting Royce Newman in, they're moving guys around. Was it one of those days where it felt like Christian Wilkins was just going to be able to tee up against this Packers front?
Well, I thought their pass blocking wasn't that bad. I mean, I thought they held up fairly well. They couldn't run the ball, and I think Miami had something to do with that by bringing a guy down in the box. And Wilkins was, he was really an impactful player. He was all over the place. But they knew that. I think they gave Rodgers time. I mean, I thought he had a pretty decent amount of time to throw the ball. They just couldn't get anything going running all that much. I'm not sure they tried that hard, but I sort of felt like they were enamored with going deep. They kept thinking that, okay, so Miami's going to bring a guy up in the box. We're going to just keep hitting Christian Watson. I mean, we're going to, it was do or die with Christian Watson. And even down on the goal line, it was like they kept trying to get the ball into his hands. And, second half, he goes out. And then they start spreading the ball around. Everybody's getting a little bit of it, and they're running the ball a little bit better, and they're hitting short passes. And that's when the offense seemed to go pretty well. And then they try to hit Lazard on a deep ball, and he underthrows it, and it's picked off. So, the lesson there was they can move the ball. They have the offensive line to do it, but they've got to be smart, and they've got to take what the defense is giving them.
What I was saying during the week, I was curious how this offense would come out from an approach standpoint, and it, to me, came out like it was expecting the shootout. They were riding Rodgers. They weren't even trying to run. Now, some of that, I think, was necessity. I don't know if Matt LaFleur, I haven't listened to his post game yet. Tell me if he mentioned this, but I don't know if he got into the need to manage Aaron Jones, but they limited him all week in practice because of the ankle injury. He had, I think, one carry in the first half. The first carry of the second half, he told me that his ankle got rolled up on, and then he had to go get it retaped. And then by the end, when it was crunch time, they were riding Aaron Jones more. I mean, at that point in the fourth quarter, he was getting the ball a lot more. I think Christian Watson got the targets that he needs. I've been saying for the last couple of weeks he needs more targets. He does, and he got them today. But I also say it can't come at the expense of your run game. Again, part of that might have been necessity, but there has to be balance. Their two best players are Aaron Jones and Christian Watson. That's run and pass. You've got to be able to balance the two while getting your playmakers the football without one subtracting from the other. If they do that, they've got talent that they can click at all cylinders. But, getting Aaron Jones out of this game healthy was big. And I'm with you, Spoon. I don't know that it's so much that they couldn't run the ball. They didn't give themselves many opportunities, especially in that first half, to run the ball.
To answer your question, Matt LaFleur didn't say anything about Aaron Jones, but Aaron Rodgers was asked about him, and he said, I know he was working through some stuff this week, essentially, with the ankle.
Yeah.
So didn't seem to say that that was seriously limiting him, but he did know coming into the game that Jones had been working through some stuff this week, quote unquote. Without Christian Watson, like you said, turn to Romeo Doubs a little bit more, turn to the run game a little bit more. Has this offense, in your opinion, become too reliant on Christian Watson in case this is another one of these injuries that keeps him out for a couple of weeks? Or do you think keeping him out was maybe precautionary just because he seems a little injury prone, so to speak?
Well, one quick note on that. I did, as Christian Watson was walking out of the locker room, I caught up with him on the run. And for whatever it's worth, he told me that the hip is okay and that he'll be all right. Now, tomorrow's a new day. So we'll see how that progresses. But he did not seem overly concerned about the hip injury, just as a quick aside.
Next thing, we've seen the past few years, or the past 3 or 4 years now, Matt LaFleur, for as good of a coach he is, can get into some situations where it's like a little bit of questionable decision making, especially in the playoff games. And he's talked about that and indicate that he seems to have learned from that. Right now, every game that the Packers are in is essentially a playoff game, and they're close scores that kind of feel like it as well. There were some decisions today that, yet again, where you kind of made you just want to go, I wonder what he was thinking there. And one of them, unfortunately, he wasn't asked about it after the game. I know it's weather kept a lot of reporters from going, so he wasn't asked about the fake punt. Spoon, I'm going to start with you. If you're trying to justify that fake punt decision on your own 20-yard line in a 3-point game in the first half against one of the more dynamic offenses in the NFL, how are you justifying it?
I have no problem with the call. I don't
Really?
understand why there wasn't an option for Levitt to call it off, because Miami knew it was coming. They lined up all their guys right across the front, like, okay, we think this is coming, and they should have called it off. And I don't know if Levitt has that ability to do it or what the key is, but it was pretty clear to me as soon as you saw it, they're right up on the line of scrimmage with two linebackers kind of in linebacker position ready to play it too. So I don't have a problem with the fake. It's probably wasn't a bad time to give it a shot. But you got to have options. I'll be interested to hear what Bisaccia has to say about it, and LaFleur on Monday.
I'm curious. That's a good point about Miami was up on the line the whole time. I'm curious what they saw that made them realize that was coming, because that's not something in my recent memory the Packers have run. You think it's something from Bisaccia's Vegas tape?
Maybe, or maybe they just thought. I was sort of thinking in my, like they're just playing it safe. Like, okay, he's punting deep. This is one of those situations where they're a desperate team and they got to get back in the game, and why not? So I don't know. Whatever the case, they blew it.
I thought it was a bad time for it for this reason. They were going tit for tat between the offense and their offense and the Dolphins' offense to that point in the game, almost like a tennis match. Like they were all holding serve, and it was such a big gamble in that moment. If you get it, what's the real reward? You're backed up quite a bit. It's not like that's putting you near midfield, at the times it felt like they'd finally broken serve, the Dolphins. And if not for the turnovers and how, that could have been a really pivotal. I felt like they got away with one there. Now, to their credit, they held the Dolphins scoreless in the last 34 minutes. So, but when we talk about they came out almost expecting a shootout, like that's stealing possession. That's a coach that is expecting a shootout and doesn't have a lot of faith in his defense, frankly, and is trying to steal a possession there.
Yeah, and I think they had blown that first possession. I think that probably really bothered him after the Keyshawn Nixon. Rodgers takes a horrible sack. And, in his head, he's probably like, well, we got to get a possession back. And he was willing to take that.
What did the TV copy look like of that second down? Because, watching it here in the stadium, Christian Watson had two guys on him, but he had a step on those guys. And there was open field up to the left sideline. And it was early in that play. To your point earlier, Spoon, I thought the pass blocking was fine. Aaron Rodgers held the ball as long as he's held the ball all season today. He just dumps that out. At the worst case, you let him run and get it. Worst case, it's incomplete and you avoid the sack. Best case, you've got, two Dolphins on him, but they're trailing. And you've got the fastest guy on the field with a step. That looked like a potential touchdown. The ball's there.
Well, if you go back, you'll go back and look at it. And it was only because I had the, ability to watch the replay. But Randall Cobb is wide open. He just sits down in a zone. And, Rodgers was talking about how he can use the different arm angles and everything. He was talking about that in the press conference. And I'm thinking, you could have just darted that out to Cobb. He just wasn't seeing stuff well early on. It just looked like he was, I don't know, he was out of it or off. Something was up.
Yeah, I had a couple people on Twitter highlight that to me, and I in this press box didn't have a great view of the replays, but my thought, and maybe it's just one of those, I haven't gotten a good look at it, but my thought is missing Randall Cobb in that situation, if you just don't, okay, because Randall Cobb shouldn't be your go-to first progression
right
goal line. Missing Christian Watson, who was maybe less open than Randall Cobb, fine, but was open. That should be the first place you're looking. And with the look you got, he's open enough. You give him the ball, you at least avoid the sack with an incompletion. I don't know how he missed that.
I have a feeling he was focused on him, and just I'll have to go back and look, but I just had the feeling that he was focused on somebody there, and I think it was Watson, but he must have felt like he just couldn't. It was going to be an interception. You know how he is when it comes to possibility for an interception.
Yeah.
But I just thought in the beginning of first quarter, he looked like, he was Baker Mayfield, not tonight. Baker Mayfield's kicking butt tonight, but, last week's Baker Mayfield, he was just off, and it was really strange.
The variance of his play right now is so extreme.
Mm-hmm.
Because he'll have those Baker Mayfield quarters, not plays, quarters. And that throw he made to Mercedes Lewis is as impressive of a throw as I can remember in some time him making.
Yeah, and the one to Lazard, too, was pretty impressive.
He put it right on him.
Yeah.
Perfect throw. His ball handling on the action pack, that's the one thing right now that Aaron Rodgers still probably does better than anyone in the NFL. There was multiple times, the most obvious on the 1-yard touchdown to Mercedes Lewis, where the defense doesn't know where the ball is. He has such masterful play at times, and such, frankly, just poor play at times, and it's been a roller coaster, which mimics how the team in the season has gone too. I mean, that's how the overall team, the overall season has gone. This is a very 500 team. It's not a bad team. It's not a good team. It's very, very 500, which means over the course of games, weeks, you'll have good play, you'll have bad play. It all kind of just jumbles up together, and you don't really know what you're going to get.
There was a play. I'm trying to remember. I'm looking through my notes now to try to find it. They were in a goal to go. They were in the red zone. I don't know if it was goal to go, but they were in the red zone, and he was trying to get Lazard on the goal line. I think it was earlier in the game.
Oh, yeah.
And he
Lazard
waited.
Really ticked off.
Yeah, he waited too long to throw it to him, and it got knocked away. It was not the interception, but it got knocked away. And if he had thrown it 2 seconds earlier, Lazard's wide open, and he probably can make the cut to get into the end zone.
Yeah, the first window was wide open.
Mm-hmm.
He throws it there, and he probably walks in. But he waited sort of to another window, and then it was too late. Yeah, mm-hmm. I remember that play.
Yeah. So to your point, Ryan, just some of those moments, because then there was the very first drive after the great Nixon returned, and then he just held onto the ball. He's tried to spin out of a sack, and then he tried to spin out of a second one, ended up taking a 13-yard loss. But then he has moments like that to Mercedes Lewis. Talking about the Mercedes Lewis touchdown, that's twice now they've run that play where they leak Lewis out and sneak him into the back of the end zone, and it's worked flawlessly both times for touchdowns. So I think at this point, teams might start looking for it. But that big pass down the sideline, Rodgers was asked after the game, how many times have you thrown that pass to Lewis? And he said, never. And he said, not even in practice. Not even in practice when we're just joking around and having fun and messing around. He said, I've never thrown that pass to him. I thought at first that he was trying to throw it away and didn't realize Lewis was down there. But Pete Doherty, our colleague, pointed out to me there was way too incredible of a touch on that ball for it to be a throwaway. He meant to put it right where he did. Guys, another thing while we're on it, I was mentioning that Nixon huge return, and then they had to settle for a field goal. First of all, for half a second there, and actually no, for a couple of seconds there, I really thought I was going to win the bet that he was going to get a kick or return for a touchdown before the end of the season. Came so close, 9 yards away from getting that touchdown. He had to leave the game with a groin injury, and that left the Packers with a huge hole, not only on return but on defense. Romeo Doubs had to step in as a returner. He looked hesitant, which is understandable. It was his first time out there. He did it a little bit in training camp, but then when he became such a huge part of the offense, they didn't want to risk him at return. I'm trying to remember. I feel like when Jair Alexander had that groin injury, it kept him out for a while, didn't it not? For 2 or 3 weeks at least.
This year?
The one earlier in the season, he got the groin injury versus the Bucks.
I don't remember it.
Oh, I thought he was out 2 or 3 weeks.
But a groin injury, it just depends on how severe it is. You know,
and I'd say to me,
guys come back from it, or they don't. You know, they're out.
On Romeo Doubs, I don't think Romeo Doubs was hesitant at all. I thought he looked maybe a little too little hesitant. His first op, he's 5 yards deep in the end zone.
Yeah, he was watching Keyshawn Nixon too much.
Like there, yeah, exactly. But he didn't look hesitant. He looked like he was Keyshawn Nixon. Like Keyshawn Nixon has, from a dynamic athletic standpoint, infused this special teams. I remember thinking more than once during the game, I can't remember seeing the Packers kickoff unit win the battle against the opposing kickoff unit so clearly as they did today. I mean, they were the explosive unit, and they bottled up the Dolphins kick returner. They almost tilted the field that way. A lot of that's Keyshawn Nixon, and they were sound in their coverage units. But with Romeo, he's not Christian Watson on offense. He's not taking the top off of the defense. He's a tremendous hands. He plucks it. I mean, when he catches the football, it's a sure thing. And he runs really good routes in the short and intermediate, and is a really good complement for Christian Watson, but not exactly the dynamic athlete that you want returning kicks.
Guys, I know that it's Christmas, so we're going to let y'all sign off here in the next few minutes. Just last thing before we do sign off, though. At the beginning of the podcast, we talked about, like, big picture, what do you kind of see of this team now? Looking ahead, they go back home for 2 final games, which they have to win if they want to get into the playoffs. Vikings and Lions. I may be crazy. I may be very crazy. I feel like the Lions would scare me more than the Vikings. I just don't think the Vikings are as good as their record. And I think that if you can get on top of them, very few teams are going to be coming back. Very few teams are going to be giving up. What did the Colts give up? Like a 31-point lead or something. And then Vikings got down again yesterday, but then did come back to win. But I just don't think they're as good as their record. I feel like you can bait Kirk Cousins into some bad throws and some turnovers. All of that to say, having seen what this team did today versus Miami, what do you think of what they can do for the final 2 games in the regular season versus the Vikings and the Lions?
The downside for them is they're facing 2 really good offenses. I mean, really good. Detroit's offense is really, really good. Their defense isn't very good, but they can put points on the board. Vikings, they are as clutch a team as there is, and they just keep winning close games. So they can put points on the board, and I'm not a believer in this defense yet. I think it was a 1-game, great. They're off to a 1-game streak, playing really well. But I'm not a believer. And I also think it sounds like the weather conditions are going to be great. It's supposed to be in the 40s this week. So it's not like they're going to get any kind of advantage against a dome team. So I don't know. They just got to come up, and this is their revenge to Justin Jefferson. They got to figure out how to stop him.
What we said last week against the Rams, where the Packers defensive front harassed Baker Mayfield the entire time, and they had to bottle that and take it to Miami, and they did today. It's the same thing with the secondary now. They have to bottle whatever they found in the second half. After Jerry Gray ripped into them at halftime, they started doing their jobs. They have to do the same thing now against Justin Jefferson. Because in the second half here, they probably communicated as a secondary as well, if not better than they have all year. And there weren't the breakdowns we've seen from week one against Justin Jefferson until now. They've got to take that into Minnesota. And if they do, Justin Jefferson can kill you. I mean, that's the guy. But to me, this was the game. If you looked at the last three, this was the game. I didn't think they were winning today. This was the game that I thought this ridiculous notion of a playoff push ended here in Miami. So for them to win this game, it doesn't. They can't go and lay an egg. Like I said, this is a 500 team. You never know what to expect. They can't just go and lay an egg these last two games. But they bottle up what they did here in the second half. They can absolutely beat the Vikings, who I'm with you, Kassidy. I don't think they're all that good either. And maybe the Lions are more dangerous because while the Vikings have something to play for, they're getting pushed for the 2 seed by the 49ers, outside shot at the 1 seed. The Lions very well could be fighting for their literal playoff lives because they're 7-8, just like the Packers in Detroit. That means a whole lot. They hang banners for those sorts of things in Detroit. That's a big deal there. So, yeah, I mean, neither of these games are pushovers, but they are at home. And I think of the final 3 games, they just won the hardest one.
I am going to throw one last question at y'all because I just saw it on Twitter and it made me remember I wanted to ask about this. Can Christian Watson not buy a DPI call in the end zone? Goodness gracious. He had another one today where it felt like the guy was just holding all over him. Is that just kind of the team's – is that opponent's strategy now? Like, we'll just save the touchdown at whatever cost and they're kind of getting away with it? Or am I reading into it too much?
I'm trying to remember what play it was.
Yeah, me too. Are you talking about the part?
Wait, I've put it in my notes too. It was – I remember LaFleur was tearing into him too.
Yep. Oh, that's where the guy kind of sort of face shielded him, but the ball hit him right in the back.
That wasn't.
I'm not going to call pass interference on a ball that wasn't even close.
Wait, is that the one I'm thinking of? No, I'm thinking of the one where Watson turned back towards it and the guy wrapped him up and was pushing his left arm down. When during the game was that? I was looking through my notes.
I don't know, but
it's not important.
There was no question that
with him in the end zone, it was definitely not defensive.
There was no question that officiating crew was letting stuff go in the secondary, but for both sides.
Yeah.
Rasul Douglas got away with some stuff. I thought for the most part, they let him play, and that wasn't such a bad thing.
I agree.
Yeah, you're right. It definitely benefited the Packers as well. And I'm always a fan of letting them play. That one just stood out because it felt like there's been 3 games in a row now where Watson's been in the end zone. And
normally he's not going to get a ton of calls. He's a rookie. He's not Devontae Adams. Devontae Adams will get the call, and Christian Watson's not getting a call.
Especially when it's not pass interference.
I'm going to have to go back and find in my notes which play I'm thinking about because I can see it. But anyways, okay. I'm going to let y'all go. Go enjoy your Christmas, Ryan. Try to get home. And then we will see you all this week to get ready and for the Packers versus the Vikings on New Year's Day. Thanks, guys.
Take care.
It's been the Green Knight Team podcast from JS Online and Packers News.